This episode of the show is brought to you from the salesman.org HubSpot studio. Welcome to the Social Selling Show. My name is Will Barron. I'm the founder of salesman.org, and joining me, co-host of this show, the king of social selling, Daniel Disney. Daniel, how's it going, mate?
It's going very well, Will. Excited to be back and digging into our next episode. This background shouldn't be around for much longer. I've got some exciting furniture coming in next week or two to turn this into the new Social Selling HQ. So hopefully in a couple of episodes' time, we'll be in a much more settled instead of box chaotic area. But excited to be back, Will.
We should probably reveal the curtain a little bit. We do batch some of these episodes. So Daniel hasn't been lazy if you see this episode a few weeks after the previous one, because we talked about you moving like weeks ago now. And anyone who follows you on social media as well, which will be a reasonable percentage of the audience, right? They might have seen that you're moving house. I know you did a LinkedIn post about it as well. So Daniel isn't being lazy. We just batch some of these episodes together so they come out kind of a few weeks after each one airs. But with that, I couldn't get a good transition in there, Daniel. I failed there slightly. We're going to talk about cadences in this episode. I thought the episode podcast timelines, I could tie it together, but I couldn't. We're going to talk about cadences. Now, I'm interested here in a few points to pick your brains on where social selling fits in with a more traditional sales cadence, and then cadences on social media, whether that be on LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever else as well, whether we can find our potential customers, whether that's its own conversation in its own right. But to get started, can you just give us an idea for someone who isn't familiar with that word cadence, perhaps someone like myself in medical device sales who sold pretty much in person in field sales his whole career? What does cadence mean, especially in the world of selling via the internet?
A cadence, Will, is essentially a process. It's a series of activities you do throughout the sales process, depending on which part of it, to either prospect or, again, through any other part of the sales process. So not a common sales cadence around prospecting would be maybe you try them on a cold call, then you leave a voicemail, then you follow up by connecting on LinkedIn, then you send them an email. We'll dig into all this today, but that is a cadence. It is a process. There are a lot of companies that don't have a cadence out there. They don't follow any sort of guidance, and it's very much just, shooting in the wind as such. And, the reality is once you have some structure, you start to see generally good increases in results. So yes, it's a process, and obviously LinkedIn is a new addition to that, which a lot of companies aren't sure where it fits in.
Okay, so multiple things here, but we'll start with this. In 2021, as we record this, when sales is becoming less of this art and perhaps more the science, and it was probably a science all along, but we'd like to think of ourselves as these people with gift of the gab, and we can communicate effectively, and we've got great influence skills. As some of that kind of moves to one side for the science of selling, which people who have been scaling sales teams have known for decades. And I know you know Aaron Ross, and I've had Aaron Ross on the Salesman podcast a bunch of times to talk about the kind of science of selling. Do we need a cadence? That was a long-winded way of teeing up the question, but are we doing ourselves a disservice if we're not using a cadence of some kind of documented playbook for ourselves and our teams?
I do think we do, but I think of cadences very much like scripts. If you follow it too closely, if you are literally reading off the paper and following it, you run the risk of becoming too robotic and missing a lot of opportunities. So I prefer to use things like scripts and cadences as guidance, as reminders, as prompts of things you should be doing. But yeah, you need to find that sweet spot. I wouldn't not use them. I wouldn't want to follow them robotically, but you need to use them as a guidance, because you might forget, do you know what? I didn't try connecting on LinkedIn. Do you know, I didn't try sending this, or, I forgot to leave a voice. Sometimes we forget. It's a natural thing when you're in your sales zone, you've got your list of prospects to call. These sort of things can help provide support and guidance. So that would be my personal view on it.
For sure. Totally agree. And as we covered in the previous episode, if you're qualifying your potential customers effectively, then there shouldn't be that. Obviously, everyone's an individual, all that lovey-dovey stuff, but there shouldn't really be that many conflicting variables between them. And so a cadence that will work relatively well for one individual, one company, one account should work relatively well for another. And so I think you are doing yourself a disservice if you don't have, again, I agree with what you're saying, at least a formal playbook that then when someone says, hey, I'm ready to buy now, you don't need to go through the rest of the steps of the process. You can be somewhat flexible with it. But I think there's real value in having that. And it also allows you as an individual salesperson, if you're an individual contributor, but more so the company as a whole, if you can document this, whether it's a CRM, whether you do it on a spreadsheet, however you do it, it allows you to build IP or intellectual property. It allows you to say, hey, I know pretty much for certain, barring any global pandemics and economic downturns like we've just been through, barring all that kind of stuff, that if I outreached 400 people this week, 100 people this week, I'm going to get so many meetings, so many leads, so many sales, so many deals, commission at the end of it, which I know for me takes a lot of the stress and the pressure out of sales, because I know that I've just got to get my head down and grind out these last few calls or emails or connection requests on LinkedIn. And hopefully, if everything goes smoothly, barring any global pandemic, the other end of things is going to be absolutely fine. Is there anything you want to add on to that front? Because I feel like this is, when we talk about cadences, when I think about cadences, I think it as a framework. It's an opportunity to reduce stress, even though it might be a little bit more work up front.
Yeah, I completely agree, Will. I think there are a minority, a tiny minority of people that might work better without that type of structure. But the vast majority of people, even those that don't want to admit it, probably will work better and more effectively and be more successful with a little bit of structure. So yeah, I agree with you all 100%.
For sure. Okay, so this is the big question, I feel. Is there a cadence where we go from logging into LinkedIn, deal closed, without having to essentially leave LinkedIn? Or is LinkedIn and social selling part of a larger series of cadences, perhaps, and it's a piece of a puzzle as opposed to the whole pie in its own right?
For majority of salespeople, LinkedIn is a piece of the puzzle. It is a slice of the pie. It is part of lots of other components. One important thing I think is important to mention, Will, is that a lot of people segment LinkedIn and social selling just to prospecting. And the reality is LinkedIn and social selling can and should be used at every single part of the sales process, from prospecting through to delivery, through to account management, to refer. There is no part of the sales process that LinkedIn cannot have a benefit. We can focus on prospecting in this sort of episode today, but it's important to understand LinkedIn has its place everywhere. So yes, I think LinkedIn should be a part of the wider puzzle. However, on our previous episode, when we talked about qualifying, we did talk about how some people stay on LinkedIn. And so there will be a minority. And for me, it's probably around 5, maybe 10% of my business and opportunities happen entirely on LinkedIn. It's a small percentage. Then there will be a cadence on LinkedIn in its own right to take you through that process. So there are both of them, but the majority will sit alongside all the other parts of sales and prospecting.
And I feel like that's almost an even more interesting conversation, because I don't really do any prospecting on LinkedIn. And you probably tell me off on this and give me a slap round the head. But I tend to do, and this is what works for us, right? Cold emails. And then I do more what a marketer would call, and I don't know if we're going to call it the same in sales, but what a marketer would call nurturing on LinkedIn. So I'll do cold outreach, typically cold email. If I've got the person's number and I've got an in or something, I will call. Well, it's not quite a cold call. I wouldn't just kind of call someone out of the blue. But if I've got an in, if I've just been on a meeting with the team or whatever, I'll give them a call. But then LinkedIn for me, typically, my cadence is cold email, phone as quick as possible. If I can't get that phone call, add them on LinkedIn, have a chat with them, drop them messages, send them links to articles. If we create content, because typically, without going too far into the marketing side of things, a lot of questions I get from salespeople who are potential prospects for our training course over at salesman.org. I get a lot of questions, whether that come in the form of objection or whatever it is. And then we'll do a podcast or an article to answer that question, or I'll answer it on the weekly live chat that we do. then I'll send them the link to the article, whatever it is. And I tend to do that on LinkedIn rather than clog up their inbox, because it's and also people then tend to share it on LinkedIn as well. You're almost poking them a little bit to be like, hey, I've just given you this ton of value. I've shared it on a platform where you can very easily share it onwards and make me look good. And there's a little bit of virality in there as well. So I'm glad you said this, because I typically use LinkedIn as a way to nurture leads as opposed to prospect or close them at the end of the funnel.
So that's a great way. There is a percentage of my business that is done in a similar context through nurturing. So I might connect with, more probably for the training side of my business, the LinkedIn social selling training, I will connect with target prospects, so VPs of sales, sales directors, sales managers, and then it will be a case of almost personal brand nurturing where I'll be sharing content regularly. And then as an example, like yesterday, I shared an article focused around LinkedIn messaging. Within that article is a video of me doing a talk and sort of promotes it, and that tends to prompt, whether it's after a few weeks, months, whatever it may be, people to then come in when they're ready. So that's a great process that works very well. But certainly for things like with the daily sales, I will do more outbound prospecting where I will target, find potential prospects. I will then connect to them, personalize the message, send a follow-up message to start a conversation, usually including some statistics or some numbers, and then usually take that into a Zoom conversation or an email, and progress it through to a point of hopefully closing it. So yeah, and that's the whole thing. LinkedIn and social can fit into so many different parts of a cadence and a process, and like you say, it can be its own process as well. It's just understanding and using it in all the ways that make sense for you, your product, your industry, and your sort of common traditional sales process.
For sure. Do you have a defined cadence that you can share with us? And from my perspective, I don't really have a defined cadence other than what I've shared of the gist of things. We use HubSpot CRM, but I'm not particularly religious until the lead is super qualified and I'm in the account and I'm doing account-based selling within the decision makers. So up until that point, I'm not as kind of focused on. I'm not as religious and as dead set with cadences. Contrary to what I said at the top of the show of this, how important they are. Do you have a set cadence that you can share with us, or are you more like me of, I don't want to say doing it by feel, but I feel like I've just got enough experience now that I know when to reach out as opposed to having to write it down and get a ping from some software.
Yeah, I'm very similar to you, Will. I've worked in sales for quite a long time now, and so a lot of it is just ingrained. It's just natural habits. But just to give it insight, the most common process I use, certainly from a daily sales perspective, will be search, connect with target prospect, send prospecting message, usually written. If they don't reply to the written one, followed up with an audio voice note or potentially a video. The goal of that is to usually get an email address to which I will send more information via email, with the goal of then looking to arrange a Zoom call or a phone call. That conversation usually has a follow-up email that eventually will then either have a follow-up call or potentially go to close or present solution. That's probably one of the most common cadences, but it's not something I have written on my wall or written on a piece of paper. It is something that, again, having worked in sales for a long time, is something I've used for so many years now.
Have we just been massive hypocrites, like preaching the importance of like the science? Well, I was preaching it. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I was preaching the science of selling and having numbers and then building your own intellectual property on the back of that this and this will lead to 1, 2, 3 will lead to X. Have I and somewhat you just been a massive hypocrite here, Daniel?
That's a fair assessment, Will. I mean, to be clear, we were clear to say that it's a guidance. It is something to help you, and like with all scripts, how long do you have to look at a script before you've memorized it, before you know it? And I'm sure it's the same for you, Will. Having used cadences and processes for so many years now, I'm using a cadence. You are using a cadence. We're just using it in a much more natural habit-based way. Whereas if we hadn't used cadences before, you do need to start with something. So I know for a lot of people listening to this, they may be SDRs, AEs, They may have a cadence, but it may still be relatively new to them. Yes, following a process and having that structure is important. But as you progress through your sales career, a lot of this is going to become second nature and it will become a natural thing. That's what happens in sales. So yeah, maybe slightly hypocritical with our passion around cadences at the start, but I do think it's fair to say as you start to work in sales for a long time, a lot of this does become second nature.
Do you have any, whether it's informal in that you want to mention the gist of the companies, or formal where you want to mention the actual companies or the software, recommendations of how to manage a cadence? So I know, for example, Outreach.io, I've worked with them on different things in the past, just to be clear. So maybe I'm somewhat biased, but they have email cadences like nailed, locked down within their software. And I don't know how well, if at all, that integrates with LinkedIn, for example, if we want to get pinged to send a message or automate a message within LinkedIn. Do you have any recommendations or thoughts on managing the cadence process so that we can automate some of it, as opposed to having to rely on kind of our own brains as we're doing with experience, or relying on a CRM to be like texting us or pinging us of, you need to do this, you need to do that?
We are so lucky, Will, to live in an age where we have these tools, because I can remember selling in a world where none of these tools existed, and I'm a huge advocate for them. Outreach is fantastic, SalesLoft is fantastic, VanillaSoft is fantastic. They're all great at helping streamline a cadence process. And as you say, we are human, so we make a lot of mistakes, whereas having things automated can help win opportunities you otherwise would have missed. When it comes to integrating LinkedIn into some of these cadences and certainly automation, my advice is tread carefully. It really comes down to what you're selling and how you word it as to whether it will be successful to automate messaging on LinkedIn. For a lot of companies, in my experience, it's not a successful strategy. It works well on email. It can work well in lots of other areas, including content sharing, etc. But when it comes to prospecting and messaging, I often find that's better done as an individual in full control in pilot mode than trying to autopilot it. But there are some industries products, and if it's worded the right way, then actually automating that can be successsill.
We've done a previous show on automation on LinkedIn, on social, which I'll include in the show notes of this episode as well. And with that, Daniel, do you think, because I agree, I can sniff out a automated LinkedIn message a mile away, and typically I've now just started blocking people, because I know once I get one automated message about some bullshit webinar that's nothing to do with me. I got one this morning, which is top of mind, on HR for car dealerships. Someone was just spamming me, like, clearly I've got nothing to do, my business has nothing to do with cars, and it's clearly, I am the HR department. You know what I mean? There isn't anyone else to sell to. We're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on HR software because it's me dealing with it all, for better or worse. So I've just started blocking the individuals. Do you think this will change over time, though? I'm sure 10 years ago, if you got an automated sales email, you'd be going, oh, what is this crap? And you'd just immediately be deleting it. Whereas I think it's almost now more appropriate, because we just get so many of them, we're just used to it. Do you think LinkedIn will forever remain this platform where it's culturally inappropriate to spam people? Or do you think with enough spam, eventually it'll just become what email is now?
I think you're right, Will, but I think one of two things is going to happen. Number one, LinkedIn's going to change its inbox to include things like junk folders, etc., to help better manage it, which I think will help people accept more of that type of messaging. But the other thing that I'm seeing happening already is the software that is automating messaging is getting better at scraping information from a user's LinkedIn profile to make it less spammy and slightly more personalized. And I've seen a few that are starting to just borderline convince even the most skeptical people that they are being sent by an individual. So I think the software is going to become more advanced and create better messaging, but I also think LinkedIn, as it continues to grow as a platform, will adapt its inbox. So yeah, I do think it will become more acceptable, but don't use that as an excuse. You still should be putting your best efforts in to have the best possible conversations. But yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I guess acceptable versus effective are two different things, right? And final thought on this, just to wrap up the show here. Am I wrong? Tell me if I am, because I might just be being thick here. I might be just doing something wrong on the platform. Does LinkedIn's inbox suck? Is it just rubbish? Because I can't seem to like put messages in. I honestly don't even know if this is a feature. Put messages in folders, things that I want to come back to, archive things. It just seems like it should just be a Gmail-esque inbox at this point, and it seems slightly archaic. Am I just being thick and doing it all wrong, or does the inbox suck?
To be clear, Will, I love LinkedIn. To anyone who works at LinkedIn, I love LinkedIn to all ends. But you are right. The LinkedIn inbox is missing a lot of opportunity. And I am confident, I probably have more belief than I should in LinkedIn to change this. I do think they're going to be updating it soon. But you are right. It is a bit of a mess. It is so challenging to keep on top of, to manage, to organize. But as we've talked about in previous episodes, obviously LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft now, and you shared some insights. We know there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes to elevate it as the amazing tool that it is and can be. So yeah, I'm pretty confident they will improve the inbox, hopefully sooner rather than later. But you are right, it is a challenge. More work than it should be.
It sucks. It's rubbish. And because of the lack of integrations, you can't pull it out into something else. Because I would love to just have a one universal inbox. I can't remember the software now. It's the guys behind Basecamp have come out with their own email software. It was in the news for shenanigans in the Apple App Store not too long ago. But they're doing some of this on top of all the filters built into the actual email providers, whether it be Gmail, I don't know anyone who doesn't use Gmail. Yahoo Mail, if that still exists. Hotmail, if that exists. I think Hotmail might be Outlook now by this point. But yeah, on top of all that, they're doing their own email sorting and auto replies to things that you come in regularly and things like this. It seems like if they could integrate with LinkedIn, maybe I'd spend less time on the platform, which is not ideal for LinkedIn, but I'd be much more effective in replying to my LinkedIn messages. Because I don't reply to basically any of them unless it's really timely, unless someone really pats me on the back. Because a lot of my messages are, hey, Will, I really like the content, a big fan of the show, just wanted to say hello. Even I don't reply to all of them because it's just so cumbersome to work through the inbox. So I'm going to spend a bit of time this afternoon, going through just to make sure I'm not missing anything. But yeah, it seems like being able to either drag the messages out or just improving the platform itself seems like a no-brainer at this point. Daniel, we're sidetracking here, mate. Back to Cadences. Is there anything else you want to add to wrap up the show with?
Just a final thought, Will. It is important to embrace these sort of tools and technologies and these processes. I've worked and managed a lot of salespeople that are very resistant to utilizing things like Cadences because they think they can do it themselves. They think they know everything. And trust me, for most people, having a bit of structure can have a hugely positive impact on your results. So utilize Cadences. And when it comes to LinkedIn and social selling, just appreciate LinkedIn has its part in pretty much every part of the sales process. So be keen to integrate it in any way that you can. And obviously everyone is different. So some people will stay purely on LinkedIn and you'll have a cadence based on LinkedIn entirely. Others, you'll integrate LinkedIn into probably what you're doing already. But utilize it, utilize the tools and technologies out there, and sell more, sell better.
Sure. My final thoughts is just to renege slightly on us both being hypocrites here and not formally having a cadence in a software that we're both using. And we're both small business owners as opposed to a salesperson in a corporate job. So we've got other responsibilities and stuff. So it is slightly different, even though we are kind of frontline salespeople with, I'm sure you write yourself a quota and we write ourselves a revenue goal each quarter that I've got to hit. It's me carrying the bag, right? But with that said, there's still massive value in not just the efficiency improvements of going, well, I'll try this cadence this month. I'll try a slightly different cadence next month. Which one was better? I'll use that one moving forward. There's efficiency benefits in that, which are clearly valuable, especially if you're a sales manager or lead and you're doing this across 50, 500 people to suss out what the best cadence is. But just be selfish about all this. Stick your cadence in right now. Do that little bit of extra work, and it's going to relieve so much stress and pressure 3 months, 6 months depending on your deal size, when you know what's coming in and what's going to come out the other end. I would do it just from that perspective alone as an individual contributor, as a salesperson. So with that was Daniel Disney, the king of social selling. My name is Will Barron. I'm the founder of salesman.org. And that was this week's episode of the Social Selling Show.
See you next time.